My husband left me for a younger woman. He said I'd grown fat. Before I continue, please give this a thumbs up if you like my story. Also, if you're new to my channel, kindly subscribe to see more interesting stories. Thank you. The night David left me began like any other, a quiet dinner, a few words exchanged, then silence. The kind that hums in your ears, louder than any sound. I remember standing in front of our bathroom mirror, staring at a reflection I barely recognized. Puffy eyes from too many sleepless nights, cheeks fuller than they used to be, shoulders slouched from carrying a marriage alone. David walked in, his phone still in his hand, his eyes scanning me like a stranger at a bus stop. "Claire," he said flatly, "you've really let yourself go." That sentence sliced deeper than betrayal. 15 years of marriage reduced to one insult. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. By morning, his side of the closet was empty. He left me for her, a 26-year-old fitness trainer named Haley Pierce. The neighborhood whispered. The pity in their eyes was worse than the gossip. I sat in that empty house for days, listening to the echo of his footsteps that weren't coming back. But something in me shifted. Pain hardened into clarity. I told myself if this heartbreak was going to destroy me, it would have to earn the right. That night, I looked into the mirror again and whispered, "He'll regret this." And from that moment, I meant every word. Weeks later, my phone became my worst enemy. Notifications blinked like cruel reminders. My cousin sent a photo, David and Haley on a snowy hill in Aspen, wearing matching coats. His arm wrapped around her waist, his grin too wide to be real. I stared at it until my vision blurred. I wasn't crying, I was memorizing. Every smile, every caption. New beginnings, red heart. Friends sent messages, half concern, half curiosity. "Are you okay? She's so much younger. He looks happy." Happy? I laughed bitterly. They didn't know that the very business paying for that trip, his precious Matthews Consulting, was mine. I built it. Every contract, every connection, every sleepless night in that home office while he bragged at dinner parties. He may have taken my dignity, but the foundation beneath his feet was mine. And I knew how to shake it. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened his old company laptop, and logged into the server I had designed. Every file, every account, every secret was still there. David thought he'd walked away from a woman who was weak. But what he really left behind was a woman who knew where all his skeletons were buried. The house in suburban Atlanta felt colder than ever. His cologne still lingered on the pillow, faint but mocking. The walls felt heavier. Every photo frame was a ghost of who we used to be. One night, I found myself in his old office, staring at the shelves stacked with binders and awards that had my fingerprints all over them. I opened his laptop again, desperate for answers, maybe closure. That's when I saw her name again. Haley Pierce. Emails, invoices, flight bookings, all under her name. But then one link caught my attention, an article headline buried deep online. Fitness trainer arrested in Dallas fraud case. Charges dropped. I clicked it, and there she was, same smile, different hair color. The article mentioned her alias, her ex-boyfriend, and a history of financial scams. I leaned back in my chair, heartbeat steady. For the first time in weeks, the ache in my chest turned into something else, purpose. Maybe this was divine irony. Maybe God had decided to even the scales himself. Whatever it was, I knew that night, I wouldn't chase David to beg for love. I'd let his choices chase him instead. A month later, it rained endlessly, Atlanta skies gray like my mood. I was sorting through unpaid bills when my phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Is this Claire Matthews?" A firm voice asked.
Yes.
"Who's speaking?" "This is Detective Ramos, Dallas Police Department. We're investigating a financial fraud case connected to a woman named Haley Pierce. Your husband's name came up during our review." I froze. "David? What does he have to do with that?" "We're not sure yet, but we believe Ms. Pierce may be using him, or his business, to launder money." After the call, I sat in silence, the phone still pressed to my ear. My heart raced, but not from fear. It was something else, vindication. I realized then that sometimes revenge doesn't need to be planned. Sometimes it walks right to your doorstep wearing a badge. I spent that night reading everything I could about Haley's past. Every lie she told was a ticking bomb waiting to go off. I looked out the rain-soaked window and whispered, God, if you're giving me a chance to make things right, I'll take it. 3 nights later, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize him. David stood there soaked in rain, eyes sunken, suit disheveled. Claire, he stammered, I think I made a mistake. I wanted to laugh. The same man who said I was too much now looked like he hadn't eaten in days. He told me Haley had drained one of his accounts and vanished. His business partners were threatening to sue. He was broke. I let him inside, not out of pity, but curiosity. He sat at the same table where he once told me I wasn't enough. Now he could barely lift his head. I don't know where else to go, he whispered. I made him tea. I listened. I even nodded. But inside, I was already making calls. Detective Ramos picked up immediately. We've been looking for him, she said. That night, as David slept on my couch, I watched the man who once thought he'd upgraded sink into the same despair he left me in. And for the first time since he walked out, I slept peacefully. Detective Ramos didn't waste time. She called me the next morning and suggested we meet at a small cafe near Peachtree Street. She was calm, sharp-eyed, and had that tone seasoned officers use when they already know the truth. She laid a file on the table, Haley's mugshots, aliases, and a list of men she'd scammed. My jaw tightened when I saw David's name penciled in at the bottom.
She's good, Ramos said.
Uses charm, sympathy, and then drains them dry. But this time, we have enough to take her down. We just need cooperation from her current victim. I almost smiled. You mean my husband? Ex-husband, she corrected gently. Ramos offered me a deal, help her connect the dots, and I'd get full immunity for any overlapping business accounts. In return, she'd make sure I wasn't dragged into the storm about to hit David. As I stared at Haley's face on those papers, I realized this was more than karma. This was a second chance at dignity. Detective, I said, sliding the file back. I'm in. I didn't want to destroy David. I wanted him to face the truth. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come in handcuffs. It comes through revelation. It began on a Thursday morning. My phone buzzed nonstop. I opened Twitter and saw the headline everywhere. Fitness influencer Haley Pierce under federal investigation for financial fraud. Photos of her, smiling, polished, flashed across every news channel. Comment sections exploded with betrayal, gossip, and shock. And then came the blow. Her known associates included David Matthews of Matthews Consulting. His empire unraveled in hours. Investors pulled out. Clients canceled contracts. Reporters camped outside his office. He called me that afternoon, his voice trembling. Claire, please, they froze my accounts. I can't even access my savings. I let a long pause hang before answering. David, maybe it's time you learned how it feels to lose something you built. The silence that followed was heavy. I could almost hear the moment realization hit him. After I hung up, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset. For once, I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry. I was calm. Because the woman he'd traded loyalty for luxury had turned out to be the same one who would teach him humility. When the chaos reached its peak, I made my move. I reopened our old company under a new name, Matthews and Company. Consulting, this time with only one Matthews. The logo was sleeker, the mission clearer. Clients who'd once ignored my calls began reaching out again, offering contracts and apologies. My first big break came when a Fortune 500 company signed me to restructure their operations. The CEO, an older woman, smiled during our meeting and said, I always knew you were the real mind behind that firm. That night, I stood in my new office, looking out over Atlanta's skyline. The city lights reflected on the glass like stars reborn. David called again. He wanted to meet. Out of curiosity and maybe closure, I agreed. He looked different. Thinner. Hollow. The man who once criticized my body now looked like he'd been devoured by his own regret. "You seem happy," he said quietly. "I am," I replied. "Turns out, shedding you was the best weight I ever lost." His lips parted as if to respond, but I walked away before he could. I wasn't his mirror anymore. I was his reminder. A few weeks later, David asked to meet again. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet diner off Marietta Street, our old date spot. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. When he spoke, his voice cracked. "She used me, Claire. Haley, she was only after the money. I lost everything." I didn't interrupt. I let him talk. Then came the confession. "The feds are investigating me for aiding fraud. I didn't know what she was doing, but they think I helped." He rubbed his temples, shaking. "I should have stayed with you. You were safe." I took a slow sip of my coffee and looked him dead in the eye. "I was never safe, David. I was solid. You just didn't know the difference." He reached for my hand, but I pulled back. I could feel the weight of his regret pressing against the table like a ghost. That night, I walked away knowing I didn't need revenge anymore. The universe was already writing it for me, one headline, one heartbreak at a time. It was a Saturday morning when I heard the knock on my door. A small boy stood there, no older than 8, with curly brown hair and wide, frightened eyes. He held a folded note in his hand. "Are you Mrs. Matthews?" he asked softly. I nodded. "Yes, sweetie. What's your name?" "Jonathan," he said, handing me the note. The handwriting was rushed, almost panicked. It read,
"He's yours.
Haley can't take care of him anymore. Do what's right." I looked at the boy again, Jonathan. There was something hauntingly familiar in his eyes. David's eyes. Hours later, after a storm of calls and DNA results, the truth landed like a final twist in a movie script. Jonathan was David's son. Haley had left him with me, vanishing without a trace. As I tucked Jonathan into bed that night, I couldn't help but whisper, "You didn't ask for this, did you?" He shook his head. I brushed his hair back and sighed. Maybe revenge had gone full circle, because while David chased youth, that youth had sent him back to me, in the form of a boy who would change everything. The morning after Jonathan arrived, the house felt alive again for the first time in months. His laughter echoed down the hallway, his small footsteps tapping across the hardwood floor. He was curious, gentle, and far too mature for his age. When I asked about his mother, his face went blank. "Mommy said she had to go away for a while," he whispered. My heart clenched. David came by that evening, pale and nervous. The DNA results had confirmed what I already knew. Jonathan was his son. He broke down in my living room, tears spilling onto the same couch where he once declared his love for another woman. "I have no one else, Claire," he said, shaking. "Please just keep him safe until I figure things out." I nodded, but I didn't do it for him. I did it for Jonathan. He was innocent, a casualty of 2 selfish adults. That night, I sat by Jonathan's bedside, watching him sleep. His tiny hand rested over mine, and for the first time in years, the anger inside me began to thaw. I wasn't sure if it was forgiveness or fate, but I knew this boy was about to change everything. Days turned into weeks. Jonathan fit into my life as if he'd always been there. We cooked breakfast together, pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, his favorite. He followed me into my home office, asking endless questions about grown-up stuff. Every morning, he left a drawing on my desk, stick figures holding hands under a smiling sun. "That's us," he'd say proudly. And slowly, I started to smile again. My neighbors noticed too. "You look radiant, Claire," one said. "Have you been seeing someone?" I just laughed. I didn't need someone. I was rediscovering me. I joined a local yoga class, started eating better, and even began consulting for young entrepreneurs. My body changed, not out of vanity but healing. David, meanwhile, called constantly. He wanted updates on Jonathan. Sometimes, I'd let Jonathan talk to him. Other times, I'd end the call after 2 words. This was my peace, my rhythm. One night, after Jonathan fell asleep, I stood in front of the mirror again. The same mirror that once reflected my brokenness. Now it showed strength.
Grace.
And a woman who had finally outgrown her pain. Word spread quickly about my company's revival. A local Atlanta TV station invited me for an interview. From betrayal to breakthrough. Claire Matthews' story. I almost declined, but something inside told me it was time. Under the bright studio lights, I told my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. I spoke about losing everything, finding courage, and rebuilding from ashes. When it aired that evening, my inbox flooded with messages from women saying I'd inspired them to stand up again. But the story reached more than strangers. It reached David. That night, he showed up unannounced. He stood in my driveway, anger trembling in his voice. "You're using my son to make yourself look good." I crossed my arms. "I don't need to use anyone, David. The world just finally sees what I was worth all along." He looked at me, jaw tight, eyes full of envy. "You really think you're better than me now?" "No," I said calmly. "I've always been. You just couldn't see it before." He left without another word. But as his taillights faded into the night, I realized something profound. His jealousy was my closure. Later, I woke up to find my company's email hacked. Dozens of clients had received messages claiming I was under investigation. Lies, all of it. I knew instantly who was behind it. David. I confronted him that evening at his apartment. Smaller, darker, nothing like the home we once shared. He looked startled to see me. "I know what you did," I said, sliding my phone across the table. He didn't deny it. "You humiliated me, Claire. You made me look weak on national television." I leaned forward. "You did that yourself." For a long moment, he just stared, then his expression softened. "You've changed," he said quietly. "You're stronger now." I smiled bitterly.
No, David.
"I'm just done being weak." When I walked out of his apartment that night, I wasn't afraid anymore. If he wanted to play dirty, I had something he didn't, the truth. And truth always finds a way to win. It was a Sunday afternoon when Detective Ramos called again. "Claire," she said, "Haley's resurfaced in Los Angeles. She's trying to cut a deal." Apparently, Haley was willing to turn over evidence that could clear David of the fraud charges, if he cooperated. But there was a catch. She wanted to meet me. I froze. "Me? Why?" "She says you're the only one she trusts to deliver her message," Ramos replied. "We think she's planning something." I didn't know what scared me more, seeing Haley again, or realizing that my revenge might not be over. Ramos asked if I'd help with the sting operation. I hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yes. But this time, I'm not doing it for David." That night, I watched Jonathan sleep, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. I brushed his hair back and whispered, "Mommy's got something to finish." And for the first time, revenge didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like destiny. Los Angeles felt like another world, blinding lights, busy streets, and secrets that walked in daylight. Detective Ramos and her team briefed me in a quiet hotel room overlooking downtown. The plan was simple. I'd pose as David's estranged wife seeking reconciliation. Haley had agreed to meet at a rooftop bar, believing I carried documents that could help her bargain with the feds. When she walked in, the air shifted. Haley Pierce, younger, thinner, dressed in expensive arrogance.
Her smile froze when she saw me.
"Claire," she said, voice low, "you look different." I smiled faintly. That tends to happen when you shed the wrong people. We talked, danced around old wounds. She bragged about her new life, about men who couldn't resist her. I played along, pretending admiration, until she leaned closer and whispered, "You know, David never stopped talking about you. Guess I should thank you for training him so well." I almost laughed. Almost. Then, when she reached for the fake documents, I gave Detective Ramos the signal. Within seconds, agents swarmed the bar. Haley's smirk vanished as the cuffs clicked. As they led her away, she glared at me. "You think this makes you better?" "No," I said softly. "Just whole." The arrest made national news. Cameras flashed, headlines screamed. Fitness influencer Haley Pierce arrested in federal sting. I sat at home watching the report, the reflection of the TV flickering across my living room walls. It was surreal. Years of pain, betrayal, humiliation, all collapsing into a single moment of justice. Later that night, my phone rang. It was David. His voice trembled. "Claire, they said you helped them catch her." "Yes," I replied. He was silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, "You didn't have to do that for me." "I didn't," I said. "I did it for the truth." He exhaled shakily. "I wish I'd seen this side of you before." I hesitated, then whispered, "This side was always there, David. You just never looked close enough." As I hung up, I walked to Jonathan's room. He was asleep, clutching a stuffed bear. The child born from deceit now represented something pure, redemption. And for the first time, I didn't see my past as a wound. I saw it as the soil from which strength had grown. 2 weeks later, I was invited to a charity gala honoring women in business. The organizers said my story had inspired thousands online. They called me the Phoenix of Atlanta. Under the shimmering lights, I walked the red carpet in a deep emerald gown, calm and unshaken. Photographers called my name, and I smiled. Not for vanity, but victory. Halfway through the event, a reporter approached me. "Mrs. Matthews, what's your message to women who've been betrayed?" I looked into the camera and said, "Don't let heartbreak define your ending. Let it refine your beginning." The crowd applauded. Somewhere deep inside, I knew David was watching. That night, after the event, I returned home to find a handwritten letter at my door. It read, "You were always the strong one. I see that now."
No signature.
But I didn't need one. The poetic part? I didn't feel triumph or gloating. Just peace, the kind that comes when you finally forgive yourself for ever loving the wrong person too deeply. A month later, David asked to meet one final time. I agreed, though every instinct told me this would be goodbye. We met at a quiet park overlooking the Chattahoochee River, the same place we used to picnic years ago, back when love still lived between us. He looked older, grayer, carrying a tiredness no sleep could fix. He handed me an envelope. Inside was a signed statement clearing me from every legal tie to his past deals. "I owe you everything," he said softly. I folded the paper and looked at him.
No, David.
"You owe yourself the lesson." His eyes glistened. "I just wanted you to know I'm proud of who you became." For a moment, the wind carried silence between us, the kind that feels like closure. "I was always this woman," I said gently. "You just couldn't handle her." He nodded, tears falling, and walked away without turning back. I watched him disappear down the path, feeling something break, not my heart, but the last chain that tied me to him. Months passed. My life found rhythm again. Jonathan's laughter filled the house with light, and every evening, he'd wait at the window for me to come home. He called me Miss Claire, though I could tell he wanted to say something more. One night, after reading him a bedtime story, he whispered, "Do you think my mom will ever come back?" I hesitated. "Maybe someday, but for now you're safe. That's what matters." He smiled sleepily. "Then I want to stay here forever." That night, as I stood by his door, watching him drift into dreams, a quiet thought crept into my mind. Maybe fate had brought him to me, not as a reminder of pain, but as the child I never had. I began the adoption process soon after. Meanwhile, David's silence grew louder. I hadn't heard from him in months. The last news I got was that his business had officially collapsed. But, strangely, I didn't celebrate. I just prayed for him. The man who once broke me, now broken himself. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means being free enough not to need revenge anymore. It was early spring when I saw his name again. David Matthews, plastered across national headlines. Former businessman arrested for fraud and money laundering. The article said the FBI had traced multiple shell companies connected to his old fitness empire. Apparently, Haley had turned evidence against him in exchange for leniency. The irony was breathtaking. The very woman he destroyed me for had become his undoing. I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling nothing.
nor I. No delayed.
Just a quiet ache for what we both could have been if greed hadn't poisoned love. That night, as I tucked Jonathan in, he asked, "Why do people hurt people they say they love?" I brushed his hair gently. "Because sometimes they love what you give them, not who you are." He nodded thoughtfully, then whispered, "I'm glad you're not like that." When he slept, I stepped outside. The air was cold, but for the first time in years, I didn't shiver. I realized then I had already won. Not because David lost, but because I'd finally stopped needing to see him fall. David's trial began in Atlanta's federal courthouse. The city buzzed with whispers, cameras flashing like lightning storms. Against my better judgment, I went, not as a witness, but as a silent observer. He looked frail in his gray suit, eyes hollow, hands trembling. Haley sat a few rows away, refusing to look at him. When the prosecutor read the charges, David's gaze swept across the room, until it found me. For a moment, his eyes softened, almost pleading. But I couldn't offer him comfort this time. As the evidence unraveled, I realized the man I once loved had become a stranger. His arrogance, his deceit, they'd consumed him from the inside. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, I didn't clap. I didn't smile. I simply stood, quietly, and walked out. Outside, the sky opened with a light drizzle. It felt like the earth itself was cleansing something long overdue. By the time I reached my car, the rain had turned heavy. I let it fall on my face, washing away the last memory of him. 6 months later, the adoption was finalized. Jonathan became Jonathan Claire Matthews, legally and officially my son. The day we left the courthouse, he ran into my arms shouting, "We're really a family now." I laughed through tears. For the first time, that word family didn't sting. It healed. We moved into a small house near the Blue Ridge Mountains, surrounded by peace and pine trees. I opened a wellness retreat for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal. It became a sanctuary for healing, mind, body, and soul. Every morning, I watched the sunrise paint the sky golden and whispered, "Thank you." Jonathan grew stronger, happier. Sometimes he'd look at me and say, "You saved me." But deep down, I knew the truth. He had saved me, too, from bitterness, from anger, from the need for revenge. We were two broken souls that fate decided to mend together. And that was the most beautiful justice of all. A year later, I received a letter from the state penitentiary. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It was from David. He wrote, "Claire, I don't expect forgiveness. But knowing you raised Jonathan gives me peace. I lost everything, but maybe this was the only way I could see who I truly was. Thank you for doing what I never could, love without condition." I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside a small wooden box, the same box that once held our wedding rings. That night, I lit a candle by the window and whispered a prayer. Not for him to suffer, but for him to find peace in the wreckage he created. Because forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the moment you stop letting your past dictate your worth. The wind blew through the open window, carrying the faint scent of rain and cedar. It felt like his soul had finally exhaled, and so had mine. It happened on a Sunday morning. A gentle knock echoed at my door. When I opened it, a young woman stood there, about 20, holding a small bag and trembling. "Are you Claire Matthews?" she asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. She swallowed hard. "My name is Emily. David was my father." My breath caught. She looked nothing like Haley. Gentle eyes, soft voice, the innocence of someone untouched by her father's mistakes. "I just wanted to meet the woman he said saved his soul," she said. Before he passed, the world tilted. David was gone. I invited her in. We talked for hours about life, forgiveness, and second chances. When she met Jonathan, they hugged like long-lost siblings. As I watched them laugh together, something inside me broke and healed at the same time. I looked out the window, sunlight spilling across the room, and whispered, "This is what redemption looks like." Because in the end, justice wasn't about seeing him punished. It was about seeing love, the kind he destroyed, reborn in the most unexpected way. Sometimes karma doesn't roar. It whispers, through the peace you find after pain, and the love that grows from ashes. Revenge isn't destroying the one who hurt you, it's becoming someone they could never destroy. Thank you for listening to my story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share my videos.